Hello, everybody. How is everybody doing? Raise your hand if this is your first time to El Salvador. Oh, wow. That's amazing. I kind of assumed everybody was here for quite a few times. This is Max Keiser.
Hi, everybody.
So many of you may know this phrase, El Salvador is winning. Here's from January 25th, 2022. I first tweeted that just 2 months after we first moved here, and it's kind of become something that a lot of people who live here and build here in El Salvador have started saying all the time. El Salvador is winning. Come experience what economic freedom looks like. Now, President Bukele, his Bitcoin policy falls under his policy of economic liberty. And, well, it looks like we're winning, right? Max, do you have anything to say?
Nah.
Okay.
We're winning. We're winning. Of course we're winning. Because you have a visionary leader. You don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you.
That's right. So 3 years ago, of course, there were only a few of us saying El Salvador is winning. Now, I think basically even the United States appears to be our first follower. They're going to follow us down the path. Now, I want to say it's a case study for winning, and why I call it a case study is coming up in a moment. But first, I want to say, hello, El Salvador is the first with a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? And we're also buying 1 Bitcoin a day. But we made this public, I think it was back in March of this year. And now, of course, if you're on x.com, any day of this past week, you see that strategic Bitcoin reserve has been trending. And it's trending because, of course, we have our first follower, which is the United States. With the election, in the landslide of President Trump, it looks like we have our first follower. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think the U.S. is doing a great job following El Salvador. Bukelenomics is the global template for how to build an economy with Bitcoin as the base of your economy. And the U.S. is now waking up to that reality. And I think they're off to a good start. And they certainly have a lot of buying power. They want to buy maybe 1 million Bitcoin. Cynthia Lummis said this morning something incredibly interesting. She said the U.S. should sell their gold and buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So the demonetization of gold is happening right now. Gold is an inferior form of money, and people are dumping gold and buying Bitcoin instead. And we see that in the ETF market as well. People are selling gold ETF and they're buying Bitcoin ETF. And anyone who follows me on Twitter will be familiar with the Peter Schiff vomiting meme that I like to post every other day as gold continues to plummet against Bitcoin.
So again, El Salvador is winning. We were the first with a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and now the United States is following. And apparently it seems that several countries are trying to front run the United States. And what they don't have that we have is President Bukele, right? Now, not at Bitcoin 2024, but at Bitcoin 2023, the last one in Miami, I did say that there would be no other Bitcoin country. I said because nowhere else in the world has a leader like President Bukele. So I think, okay, the U.S. is following in our footsteps, but I still think that we will always be the #1 because we have President Bukele. President Trump is definitely a pretty cool guy. We like him, and but he's no President Bukele.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it as Bitcoin per capita, the El Salvador will have the greatest Bitcoin per capita right now, and that will continue to be the case going forward. With the U.S., it's $36 trillion in debt. It's a $36 trillion economy. So they have a lot of Bitcoin to buy to equal the Bitcoin per capita that you have in El Salvador. What the U.S. does have per capita is about $175,000 worth of debt per citizen. right? So, but I applaud them for trying, and everybody else is going to be trying because there's only a limited amount of Bitcoin available. So I guess the price is going to have to go higher.
So, so that's what I said at Bitcoin 2023, is that there would be no other Bitcoin country because President Bukele is a 1 in 500 year type leader, so we would have to wait another 500 years. But I want to go into a little bit deeper into why El Salvador is winning and why El Salvador, Bitcoin country in particular, is winning. Because there was recently an INSEAD study, and this was remarkable. I don't know if anybody had a chance to read it. You do have to pay for it, from Harvard Publishing. But El Salvador, surfing from the red to the blue ocean, from the homicide capital of the world to a country of hope and prosperity. Now, some of you Europeans here will, of course, know that INSEAD is one of the most important business schools in the world. But they look at El Salvador as a case study for winning. Like, how did it go from a red ocean to a blue ocean? And I'm going to tell you, oh, I think that should have gone earlier. This is important to see why Bitcoin country, why not crypto country, why we are not digital assets country or any other of the 5.5 million coins. Because the blue ocean strategy is something that, a concept that INSEAD came up with. And they frame it, it's a business strategy, but you could look at the country as a business as well. And President Bukele is like a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk of leaders. Involves creating new markets or blue oceans instead of competing in existing markets or red oceans. And two of the main concepts that they point out that a winning strategy is to create new markets, i.e. we're the first Bitcoin country by 3 years, and focus on key factors rather than diffuse competitive efforts. So we have Bitcoin. We're not crypto country or any of the 5.5 million cryptos. We're not digital assets country. We're not diffuse. We are Bitcoin country, where like we have an identity and a brand.
Yeah, if you listen to President Bukele's speeches, he often talks about all of the remedies, or what he calls the recipes, that are offered to El Salvador from global institutions like the IMF or the World Bank, et cetera, are not the policies that the countries who are affluent and do well in this world follow. And so what President Bukele has said, well, you know, we're not going to follow you. We want to be like you. We want to be independent. We want to be sovereign. We want to be wealthy. So we're going to go our own way. And that's the difference between a red ocean and a blue ocean. The red ocean is do the IMF program that we do with every other Latin American country, and we do all over the world, and it just increases poverty. And we get rich by acting as rentiers on your sweat. That's been rejected. And in its place is the blue ocean of Bitcoin. And it immediately catapulted El Salvador into the global presence on the world stage. Suddenly it's working. So that was the right choice.
Also, I could quickly say for blue ocean versus red ocean, the market is diffuse and kind of a gray blob, and the market participants, the red is blood in the water, right? It becomes a vicious predatory fight for each little bit of market share. So you might think of that as electric vehicles. Look at how many electric vehicles, faded away, right, or failed. Ford is shutting down their electric vehicle division because it's an electric vehicle division within General Motors or within Ford or within Volkswagen or within BMW. Like it's an electric vehicle division, whereas Tesla is Tesla. They're the blue ocean and they own the entire electric vehicle space because everybody else was competing as companies that were already in existence to introduce an electric vehicle, where Tesla introduced Tesla, the brand, the image, the lifestyle, the vibe, right? So that's a red ocean versus blue ocean.
Yeah, when I first heard this red ocean, the first thing I thought of was the red wedding. from Game of Thrones. I'm thinking that was a bloody mess. Blue Ocean is more like, you mentioned Elon Musk there. I mean, he simply said, fuck it, I'm going to Mars. So that's a blue ocean way to think.
And I'm going to go more into detail about El Salvador is winning. El Salvador is Bitcoin country, and why we're winning, because we're Bitcoin country and because we're not in this bloodbath of sometimes there's tens of thousands of new shitcoins being printed every single month at this point. So El Salvador, remember blue ocean, create new markets. So if you go to Google and you enter Bitcoin country, for the longest time, and now there's some countries starting to pop up as well. So Bhutan is up there as well now. But for the longest time, here's the blue ocean, the clear blue ocean of creating a new market. Bitcoin country, El Salvador. Now, if anybody works in SEO or marketing, online marketing, you know that to get that real estate there on a Google search, if you had to pay for it, it's going to cost a shit ton of money. You're going to have to print up many, many shitcoins in order to pay for that, right? So we had the whole first page. There were no other Bitcoin countries. I'll compare it to, at the same time, the same day, the same hour, I did a search for crypto country. All of these countries and 36 more, El Salvador was down on those 36 more. So you see a blue ocean versus a red ocean. We were nobody in a crypto country. We are number one. We are the only Bitcoin country.
Yeah, I'll say, about Bhutan, they're selling a lot of the Bitcoin that they mine hydroelectrically. So, those saffron robes that the monks wear are pretty expensive.
So that's a winning strategy, because he had the vision, he took the risk, he made the calculated decision 3 years ago and announced at Bitcoin 2021 that El Salvador would be adopting Bitcoin. So they were the first. This conference was the first they actually adopting Bitcoin, came out of right after this, 2021. So I'm showing you why El Salvador is winning. And why I said it back, we lost the first one. So why I said it back in 2022, January 22, when we first came here, because El Salvador is Bitcoin country, it's not crypto country. Because Bitcoin, as we see, is the number one, right? There is no second best. So why would you strive to be second best? Why not just aim for number one? Well, look at this. So here's again, a blue ocean versus a red ocean. So we own Bitcoin country by being Bitcoin country. When they first started, we had the Bitcoin ETFs, and that put Bitcoin into the, as an investable asset for many Americans that didn't know how to go onto an exchange or buy some Bitcoin or find a way to buy Bitcoin. I always said this when the Ethereum ETF was coming on, and then other people are saying for Solana or other tokens. I always knew if you went to Google Trends, outside of crypto Twitter or outside of even Bitcoin Twitter, is that mindshare is also important. The only way to win is with mindshare. Just like I said with Tesla, Tesla is Tesla. Ford, GM, Toyota, BMW, all those other companies are car companies with an electric vehicle division. Tesla is Tesla. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. There's no mindshare for any other currency. Bitcoin is cryptocurrency, it says. Ethereum is software. Blockchain platform, Cardano, blockchain platform, Solana, cryptocurrency, Dogecoin. So you could always see forever that Bitcoin was always the only one in the mindshare. It was number one in the world, whereas these millions and millions and millions of other tokens were competing for whatever is not focused on number one.
Yeah, I just saw today that Ethereum has hit another new low against Bitcoin. So it continues to trend to zero against Bitcoin. Everything goes to zero against Bitcoin. But to your point, and I remember you saying this, that when these ETFs came out and then they were discussing the Ethereum ETF, you said this will show to Wall Street how useless Ethereum is and it will accelerate its collapse. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, because, well, my background is actually Hollywood, and I knew for a fact you needed a hook. You needed a narrative and a story that everybody in this room could be part of, right? There's no story to Ethereum, right? Bitcoin came out of the blue. Anybody who was there in 2009 or 10 or 11, it came out of the blue with a bunch of freaks and early adopters, and it took on the world, right? And now the most powerful country in the world is adopting a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and that came out of the blue. But Bitcoin is money; everything else is not. And that's also interesting that Bitcoin is winning, and therefore El Salvador is winning, because money, what's the total addressable market for that? That's in the order of hundreds of trillions of dollars per year, right? In total, hundreds of trillions of dollars. Ethereum is software, and they kind of position themselves as software. Well, Microsoft is the biggest software company in the world. How big are they? Like $3 trillion. Okay, that's what they're competing against. That's what Ethereum is competing against, and the other coins. And even just recently, again, blue ocean, the blue is Bitcoin, and look at the others. The liftoff is happening in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is winning, and therefore El Salvador is winning.
Yeah, you mentioned you need a good story, and with Ethereum, as everybody knows, since it's initiated, they change their story every 18 months to 24 months, like what the use case is, what we really do. So they don't really have a consistent story. With Ethereum, it doesn't change anybody, but a lot of people change Ethereum. With Bitcoin, you don't change Bitcoin, but Bitcoin changes you, right? So we're all coming around to Bitcoin's story, and one by one, the light goes off, and we are on the vector of Bitcoin. With all these other things going on, you've got people trying to figure out what they're doing, and they change the story every few months.
Again, so you have President Bukele, he has the vision, and then to implement the vision, you need to persuade all of you people to move to El Salvador, to build in El Salvador, but a strategy to win. And the INSEAD report on the case study of El Salvador and how it's won, they position us as a country strategy. And of course, the number one pillar of the success for the strategy of rebranding the country, basically, is what the report is looking at, is the security situation. So they took from gangs to safe streets. That was the number one pillar of the strategy of President Bukele. And of course, that fits totally in with the mindset of Bitcoiners, because, many Bitcoiners are anti-statist. Bitcoin, of course, separates money from state. And Bastiat would have said the only purpose of a government is to protect life, liberty, property, right? So it was important to have security in place because there was mass plunder. Plunder was a way of life for, well, how many gang members are in prison? 80,000. And he's building a white-collar CCOT for the politicians and corrupt officials who also plunder. So we had to get rid of the plunder that was holding back El Salvador for decades prior to the winning strategy.
Yeah, not only does Bitcoin demonetize gold, but it also demonetizes violence because it is confiscatable and uncensorable. The strategy of committing violence to obtain somebody's wealth is disintermediated by the presence of Bitcoin, which is unconfiscatable. So it's no coincidence that after the country made Bitcoin legal tender, shortly thereafter, they become intolerant of violence and gang violence, and the war on gangs started, and they won.
El Salvador is winning. So this paragraph is, the last paragraph there is, again, why El Salvador is winning. Because, maybe it's not so much anymore, but there used to be more of a meme about Bitcoiners being honey badgers, no matter what you threw at it. And because there used to be a lot of spears and knives and all sorts of things thrown at Bitcoiners. Before now, the most powerful country in the world is thinking of adopting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There used to be like Senate investigations and people arrested and threats of shutting down everything. But now the concept is hodling. So we're going to look at this of our strategy, President Bukele's strategy of El Salvador winning, because critics of many of President Bukele's policies, but in terms of this conversation, we're looking at Bitcoin policy, we're quick to dismiss his ambitious plans, predicting that his unorthodox approach and initiatives would lead to failure. Yet Bukele, unfazed by the naysayers, remained undeterred. And, I don't think many people really appreciate that bit about remaining undeterred, to stay true and faithful to your vision no matter what. Because when he first introduced the gang war, Max and I were here. We had dinner with him actually like 2 nights before the beginning of the gang war, and we with Ricardo Salinas. And there was a lot of negativity, let's say, from the US. Some international press were calling him a dictator. Bitcoin then crashed because of all the fraud and plunder in the crypto space, and Celsius and FTX and Terra Luna and all that stuff happened. And he remained steadfast, determined, and kept building and kept hodling.
Yeah. This word critics is interesting. It reminds me of what Michael Saylor has said about Bitcoin. Nobody who has spent time studying Bitcoin has anything negative to say about Bitcoin. All of Bitcoin's critics, there's Nassim Taleb or Peter Schiff, et cetera, you can tell by the way that they talk about Bitcoin that they've never actually studied Bitcoin. They don't know anything about Bitcoin. Similarly, in El Salvador, the critics of El Salvador and President Bukele, they've never been to El Salvador. They don't know what's going on here. Anyone who comes here and stays here, like you all are doing in this trip, leaves very enthusiastic about what's happening in El Salvador and the president. So there really are no critics of El Salvador from anyone who actually has come and put the time in and verified what's happening.
Critics were quick to dismiss his ambitious plans, predicting that his unorthodox approach and initiatives would lead to failure. This happens with many visionaries. It happened to Steve Jobs. It happened to Elon Musk. Remember how many people were making fun of Elon Musk for blowing $44 billion on Twitter? Who has laugh with him? Well, same here. This is President Bukele. He constantly tweets this. This was his, just a few days ago when Bitcoin hit new all-time high after new all-time high after new all-time high every hour. Everybody, all the Bitcoin press had to keep on updating their X account, 90,000, 91,000, 92,000, 93, 4, 95. So I told you so, right? He is constantly saying that over and over the past 2 or 3 years, because, there were a lot of critics on all of these policies, and a lot of it had to do with Bitcoin, because El Salvador is winning because Bitcoin is winning, but El Salvador is winning because President Bukele adopted Bitcoin. Because it was Bitcoin, when we adopted Bitcoin here, that the global press and the most global powerful press is actually the financial press, right? So Wall Street press started to look at El Salvador like, what the fuck is this little country? And they all had to Google it and find out, is there a country named El Salvador? And why the hell are they doing this? And mocking El Salvador for their Bitcoin policy. But the thing is, if I could go back to that image of President Bukele, what they found was a guy, it's a good photo of him. They found him when all the world's press showed up, and they were, he got to charm the world and be right over and over.
He's a very convincing leader versus a politician, and he's able to get everybody in government on board, with his vision. So very rarely in history do we see that in leaders, and fortunately it happened at this time in what we now call Bitcoin country.
And El Salvador is winning, like I said, because the world media, as INSEAD, one of the top business schools in the world, in their case study of El Salvador and how it's winning and why it's winning and how it was able to rebrand so successfully. I just want to point out that Bitcoin 2021 in Miami, when the president declared that he would be making Bitcoin legal tender, this is the process I'm talking about, is this simple yet powerful announcement mobilized the worldwide Bitcoin community who flooded social media about El Salvador making history by becoming the world's inaugural Bitcoin nation. And with that, without spending a dime or a cent on marketing, the country's brand elevated significantly, and the small Central American nation was catapulted onto the global stage as a leader in what many consider an important future of finance. So that's how we catapulted to the top. We didn't do baby steps. He says paso a paso all the time, but we just jumped to the very top. And a lot of it is to do with the Bitcoin community.
Yeah, it's the key there was not spending a penny on marketing, which is really remarkable. And you think about the history of markets and branding, like Nike signing Michael Jordan as a rookie, turned them from a second best sneaker company to a multi-billion-dollar brand, and that type of thing that goes on occasionally. Phenomenal quantum leaps. And that was really conceived by the folks who are the brain trust here in El Salvador, led by the president. And the results are now the United States is scrambling to catch up. So freedom, the Statue of Liberty, is really a volcano in the center of El Salvador somewhere. This is the new shining city on a hill. El Salvador is now the global headquarters of economic freedom, freedom of the press, and freedom of expression.
El Salvador is winning in these last few minutes. I'll say, one of the things that President Bukele did early on was establish the Bitcoin office, and I'm the director of that. And I'll just highlight some of the things that we've been working on to help make sure that El Salvador wins. And that is brand recognition. Like I said, we're a Bitcoin country. We have really focused on developing that as a blue ocean strategy, though I didn't know it was called the blue ocean strategy at the time, but now I know. I get to say, oh, that was my strategy. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, we established that, and now everybody's jumping on that. Regulatory clarity, well, that was a buzzword a few years ago. Everybody, well, the US was signaling, right? Gary Gensler, I know, boo, everybody hates him, but he was saying Bitcoin is a commodity, everything else is a security. So we just provided that in order to give an avenue for if shitcoiners show up, like where to send them to Digital Assets Commission outside of the main economic paradigm of El Salvador and our brand of Bitcoin country. And this isn't the most important, I think, for El Salvador. Why El Salvador will keep winning into the future, and that is our world-class elite dev education. So we have Kubo Plus, and you may have seen some of the students that are here over the next 2 days on stage often. And this is part of our strategy to keep winning long into the future. And this is a moat that no other country has. El Salvador has been building the best Bitcoin education programs in the world for over 2 years now. We have Me Premier Bitcoin in our high schools. We have Node Nation in our high schools, where students are learning to actually how to assemble a full node, a lightning node, and build their, and actually Bitcoin mine. We have Kubo Plus training Bitcoin and Lightning devs. We are now building a workbook program, which will be introduced in January for second and third graders. Lena Seish and Me Premier Bitcoin are working on that. What other program? Oh, we taught 80,000 civil servants, a 3-day course about Bitcoin. So for over 2 years now, and people, it's hard to really tell you how much, like how important that those first inaugural class of Cuba Plus. They're all here. They meet. They discuss. They're educating other Salvadorans, smart Salvadorans, to get involved in Bitcoin. So we have a huge lead with this. And one more quick thing is that Bitcoin banks will be coming soon too.
Very soon. I think that's it. We nailed it.
Right. So thank you for everything, and thank you for being here. That you are here is a testament to the fact that that El Salvador is winning, and that President Bukele's policies and strategy for implementing Bitcoin country brand is winning as well. Thank you, everybody.